Can you tell us about why Donald Trump wants to give a tariff-funded bailout to the farmers?
Well, this is pretty straightforward, Tiana, and essentially, back when the president was announcing all of his tariffs, including sectoral and these wider Liberation Day reciprocal slates, he got a bunch of blowback from farmers because naturally, you would think, in response to the president's tariffs, other countries would place tariffs of their own, specifically on American agricultural products. We fast forward a few months to just a few weeks ago, and China has ended, for the first time in 20 years, all purchases of U.S. soybeans. It's more than a quarter of all U.S. soybean production in the States, and instead, they are now purchasing soybeans from Brazil, a country that has some 50% roughly tariff rate put on them by the Trump administration. So it does seem like the president is trying to solve a problem of his own creation, because you have to imagine, most of these farmers are in red states, and even the farmers in the blue states, they voted heavily for Trump. That's just the way things go. I don't make the rules about regional demographics. That being said, we've heard a lot from Brooke Rollins, from the White House. We're going to be putting together some type of aid package. We heard it, back in the spring. We're hearing it now again, but there are numbers attached to it, with, the most conservative estimate being a bailout of some $50 billion directly to those ag producers. And on the one hand, this makes sense. Sure, we are pursuing a radical policy change. We need to, account for the people who will be, impacted negatively greater than the wider population. But my understanding is that this doesn't make sense for any number of reasons. So Tiana, this doesn't seem like the worst idea. You want to take care of Americans when you're implementing new policies. But experts like yourself have been voicing concern about this. What's your biggest qualm with this proposed bailout?
The short answer is that the revenue from the tariffs has already been spent. Mm-hmm. About $6 of every 7 that comes into the U.S. Treasury is already spent only on Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and interest on our already existing national debt. So when you're posting a deficit that's this big with interest costs that have grown 8% year over year, it means that the Treasury would have to finance new debt in order to fund this. So already, bad idea, because the revenue isn't sitting in a magic lockbox. That's not how Washington works. Secondarily, markets are kind of viewing the tariffs right now as temporary liabilities, because we will see in the future the Supreme Court in November consider the challenge to the IEEPA tariffs. Those are those national, non-sector specific reciprocal tariffs. Mm-hmm. And that's about half of all the increased tariff revenue that's come in. If SCOTUS overturns those tariffs, there's a chance that they say Treasury has to pay them back, which means not only would they have to pay back, $100 billion in tariffs. If you create another $50 billion hole, you've added another $150 billion to the deficit,
right.
Potentially more than that. But really, the biggest issue, and the reason why you at home should care, is that this jacks up the rate on your mortgage. If you're shopping for a new house, it jacks up your credit card rate. Donald Trump, as we know, has been obsessed with the idea of bringing down interest rates. And we have discussed for many reasons why the Federal Reserve only controls a very short end of the curve. Only very short-term Treasury bills, 1-month Treasuries. It does not influence the long-term interest rates that determine not only how we finance the federal debt, but also how that trickles down to the consumer. And we know from the last time Trump did a farm bailout that it did not end well, and we were in a very different fiscal position. So the first time Trump did his farm bailout, that was in 2018, and that pushed that 10-year Treasury yield from 2.8% to 3.2% within 3 months. 3.2%, anyone in this White House would cut off a limb in order to get that. We're looking at a well over 4% 10-year Treasury yield. If right now, the only reason why these bond investors are letting the federal government borrow at still a relatively low interest rate across all federal borrowing, Uncle Sam's being charged like 3.3, 3.4% on borrowing. The only reason why the bond market hasn't freaked out about the tariffs is because they believe that the tariff revenue is going to put a little dent in that national debt.
Yeah.
because that's what Donald Trump has said. That's the entire basis of the national emergency declaration for, at least as it's being argued to SCOTUS. It's why they're saying you cannot undo these because we are relying on this revenue to fill a hole. And it means that ever so slightly, the increase in deficit spending is slightly less than what Joe Biden was doing at this point in 2024, but barely. And the only reason why that's the case is the tariffs.
Yeah.
So what that means practically, let's say Donald Trump gets his way, Congress somehow allows him to do a bailout with funds that they didn't even authorize the collection of. I don't understand legally how that makes sense. Let's say he spends $50 billion on a farm bailout that the farmers warned Trump already, don't do the tariffs. Okay, we pay them off. SCOTUS overturns the IEEPA tariffs. We have to give $100 billion back. We've added $150 billion to the national debt. The bond market freaks out, and all of a sudden those borrowing costs, we've seen the 10-year hit 5%. Every, tenth of a percentage point of increased interest rates corresponds to hundreds of billions of dollars each year just in new borrowing costs. Mm-hmm. And this is where I always ask the question, what the hell are the Democrats doing?
That's a very good question, and I think naturally the immediate reaction is to jump to the political ramifications of any action like this. I think the Democrats, to their credit, are focused on the government shutdown right now. That being said, this is playing out exactly how they could have only hoped it could have played out, right? One, you have the legal challenges and the potential that this could blow up quite literally in Donald Trump's face. Two, you've got the president implementing new policies, realizing, oh, this is going to screw over my voters.
Yeah.
Now I have to scramble and try and cut the legs out from under myself just to appease them. I think they're in the best position here. And now I say that relatively because, again, what's bad for the economy is bad for all of us. And certainly, again, at length, we talk about how important it is to have two strong parties in the two-party system. That being said, I do want to see more out of Democrats in terms of messaging on this, not only because I think it's important to talk about policy, not just politics, in discussing Washington, D.C., but because, again, the polling at this point in time is on their side, right?
Yes.
Let's flash back to January 20th. Trump comes in office. His two biggest polling outliers by far, the economy and immigration. And now, in most, if not every single poll, he is underwater on both of those issues. There was concern, there was confusion about how will the implementation of the tariffs actually play out. Well, we're 6 months after Liberation Day at this point in time, and we've got a very clear idea of what's happening. Not only is it not followed through to the same extent that the president is saying, and when I say that, I mean we're not bringing in $1 trillion in tariff revenue every month, even though the president is telling you that in every single speech, including like the one he gave in Norfolk, Virginia, on an aircraft carrier, which was pretty cool on Sunday. But he's also not even doing with the tariff revenue what he said he was going to be doing. The goals and the strategy behind these tariff tactics are played out, and now it's time for Democrats to step up if they are a serious party and actually want to object to the president's agenda rather than do so in a way that can help them get through a Democratic primary in New York City. This is the time. Do you think this is a hole the president can get out of? Because it, like we just outlined, with the farmers in particular, he's kind of damned if he does, damned if he doesn't. He either, sells those people out to dry and essentially sticks to his tariffs and risks political blowback on Republicans, or he courts those people and undermines his tariff strategy and isn't able to reshore manufacturing or pay down the national debt or do any of these things that he said he wants to do with the tariff revenue.
I mean, you say the tariff strategy, and I think the issue is that 6 months in, we still don't know what the hell the strategy is. There was that period in time where it seemed like, okay, the goal are trade deals. And there are some countries that do deserve to have more restrictive trade deals still because they refuse to play ball.
She's saying India. She's saying India.
Maybe I'm saying India. But if you have countries like Vietnam that are willing to say, we want to go to zero tariffs. We want to remove all the non-tariff barriers. We will take in 99% of your agricultural goods, and you don't take them up on it, I don't think that's much of a strategy. I think the end game is here, and the end game sucks. The end game is that Trump is negative 30 points on tariff policy and about negative 20 on inflation. And we know it's not that the tariffs themselves are inflationary, but they inhibit growth in a way that makes it harder to fight the inflation that already exists. And so with Democrats, you could see a Clinton-era Democrat running not just as a free trader under the correct assumption that most Americans view themselves as consumers first, right? Most Americans do not work in manufacturing, and also manufacturing jobs have collapsed by about 80,000, I think, since Trump took office. But also, just if you really want to do the no kings thing, I cannot think of a more unconstitutional usurpation of power executed by Trump in a way that no other Democrat has actually attempted than taking Congress's Article 1 power to impose import duties and levy taxes. And it just seems like the most obvious strategy in the world. And I get that it's because part of the left is salivating over a President AOC using the exact same IEPA powers to tariff people over climate change and tariff them over whatever, left-wing pet project will emerge by 2028. But I would hope that common sense liberals realize, why would we trust the executive branch with this much power? Like, why wouldn't we want to take this power back? And right now, it's just going kind of unchecked.
Yeah, it's a good question, and certainly one we'll be focused on over the next month, because the Supreme Court is hearing a case on the president's, nation-focused tariffs the first week of November.